On the night everything transformed, Kwame performed for a captivated audience, but it was Amina's response that froze time. Upon hearing his voice, she fainted, and chaos erupted in the restaurant. When Kwame discovered who she was and the bond they shared, his life was turned upside down. He was about to uncover the secret his grandmother had concealed for years, and his life would never be the same. Kwame, a 14-year-old boy from Nairobi, was raised under the loving care of his grandmother, Abina. She was a strong and nurturing woman who, despite her own struggles, always made sure Kwame felt cherished. Yet there was one aspect of his life cloaked in mystery: his parents. Whenever he inquired about them, Abina would gently reply that his mother had passed away when he was a baby and his father had left the city without a trace. Although this enigma haunted him, the love and warmth he received from Abina filled most of that emptiness. Life took an unexpected turn when Abina fell seriously ill. Her health deteriorated quickly, and it became evident she required an expensive surgery that Kwame had no way of affording. With no other family to rely on, Kwame was sent to live at a local orphanage where long, quiet corridors echoed the uncertainty he felt inside. For a 14-year-old boy, the burden of responsibility was overwhelming. He had to save the only person who had ever been there for him. Despite the challenges he faced, Kwame was not one to give up. He possessed one talent that always brought him and Abina joy: his voice. Since he was young, singing had been their connection, filling their small home with music and memories. One night, as Kwame lay awake in his orphanage bed, he resolved to use that same voice to change their lives. He would sing not just for enjoyment, but to raise enough money to cover Abina's surgery. With quiet determination, he began sneaking out of the orphanage at night, performing on the streets and in small venues. His big break arrived when he learned about a popular restaurant in Nairobi, the K Lounge, known for showcasing local talent. It was an upscale venue, far removed from the world Kwame knew, but he was determined he had to try. On a chilly, rainy afternoon, he stood outside the K Lounge, heart racing with both nerves and hope. Inside, diners sat at elegant tables, chatting and enjoying the ambiance. Gathering his courage, Kwame stepped through the doors where candlelight flickered softly, and the scent of fine dining filled the air. Behind the bar stood Juma Mwangi, the owner, a man in his late 40s with graying hair and a sharp suit. He had a stern demeanor that could intimidate anyone. Approaching Juma, Kwame took a deep breath. "Sir, I need a job," he said, his voice steady, though his eyes revealed the urgency behind his words. Juma raised an eyebrow, surprised by the young boy standing before him. "You're just a kid," he replied with a hint of skepticism. "This isn't the place for someone your age," but Kwame refused to back down. "For music, there's no age limit. I can sing. Please just give me a chance." Juma studied the boy for a moment, noting his seriousness, an intensity most kids didn't possess. After a pause, Juma finally sighed. "All right," he said. "I'll give you a shot. But if you don't have the talent you claim, this will be your first and last performance." Kwame felt relief and nervous anticipation wash over him. This was the opportunity he had been waiting for. Taking a deep breath, he stepped onto the small stage. Closing his eyes to block out the distractions around him, he focused on the music, on Abina, and on the promise he'd made to himself to save her. He began to sing "Fly Me to the Moon," his smooth, soulful tone far beyond what anyone expected from a 14-year-old. As he sang, the room gradually fell silent. Diners who had been chatting stopped and turned their attention to the stage, captivated by the depth and emotion in Kwame's voice. It was as if time itself slowed, and only the music mattered. Each note Kwame delivered held purpose and emotion, carrying the weight of his love for Abena and hope for a better future. By the time he finished, the restaurant was in stunned silence. No one moved, as though the last note still lingered in the air. Then the room erupted in applause, loud and enthusiastic, with some diners even rising to their feet in a standing ovation. Juma, who had been watching from behind the bar, was visibly impressed. Approaching Kwame, he gave him a nod of approval. "You've got real talent, kid," Juma said, admiration coloring his words. "I'll hire you, but under two conditions. Keep your grades up at school and don't tell anyone about this job. Got it? Kwame nodded eagerly, gratitude shining in his eyes. Thank you, Mr. Mwangi. I promise I'll do my best, he replied, voice full of determination. With that, Kwame left the K Lounge in a whirlwind of excitement. Though life at the orphanage remained unchanged, his nights now held the promise of something more, a lifeline to help Abina. Back at the orphanage, Miss Aisha, the kind-hearted cook in her late 50s, noticed Kwame's renewed spark. She had short, curly grey hair and a warm smile, bringing motherly comfort to many of the children. That evening, as Kwame sat at the dinner table, she saw the glow in his eyes. "What's going on, sweetheart?" she asked, sitting beside him. "You look like you've got a secret." Kwame hesitated, then leaned in. "I got a job, Miss Aisha. I'm singing at a restaurant to earn money for my grandmother's surgery." Miss Aisha's eyebrows rose, but her surprise quickly melted into a smile. "That's wonderful, Kwame, but you must be careful," she said. "The last thing you need is trouble." Kwame nodded. "I know, but I have to do this. She's all I have." Miss Aisha gently patted his hand. "I understand. I'll help you in any way I can. Just be sure to stay safe and keep up with your studies." With that, Kwame's secret was safe and he had an ally. Every night after that, she quietly unlocked the orphanage's back door, allowing him to slip out unnoticed, supporting his dream with a quiet understanding only a true friend could give. As nights passed, Kwame's performances at the K Lounge became a quiet success. Juma kept his word, letting him sing every week. The unique quality of Kwame's voice drew new patrons, and soon he was a regular fixture, though mostly for the late-night crowd. True to his promise, Juma kept their arrangement under wraps, never telling his regular staff the full story. For you, Kwame, these nights were his lifeline, the only way to save Abina, who was slowly fading away in her hospital bed. One evening, a woman named Amina Njeri stepped into the K Lounge. A successful businesswoman in her early 40s, she had moved to Nairobi after a series of personal losses and was seeking a quiet place to unwind. Known for her sharp intellect and reserved demeanor, Amina had spent most of her life building her career. But a persistent sadness lingered, something that no amount of success could heal. Sipping wine alone at a corner table, she barely noticed the young boy stepping onto the stage until he began to sing. From his first note, Amina froze. There was something about Kwame's voice that stirred memories buried deep within her. She couldn't place it at first, but as his voice soared through the lounge, she felt an inexplicable connection. His tone, his phrasing, reminded her of someone she'd once loved with all her heart. Kofi, a gifted singer who had vanished from her life without warning. Amina's hands trembled. Memories of Kofi came flooding back. His voice, his presence, and the pain of losing him with no closure. As Kwame continued, Amina felt her chest tighten, as though she were confronting a ghost. Her heart raced, and the room blurred as those long-buried emotions overwhelmed her. Kwame finished, and the lounge erupted in applause, but Amina remained in a fog. Before she could stand, the world spun. She gasped as dizziness overwhelmed her, and her vision darkened. The last thing she saw was Kwame rushing toward her, alarmed, as the lounge erupted in confusion. Juma immediately called an ambulance. Kwame, kneeling at Amina's side, tried to keep her conscious. "Stay with me," he pleaded, fear constricting his voice. Paramedics arrived within minutes and whisked Amina to the nearest hospital. Though Juma assured Kwame she would be fine, the boy felt something bigger was happening. He couldn't shake the sense that Amina had recognized him, or his voice, before collapsing. That night back at the orphanage, Kwame couldn't sleep. Questions tumbled through his mind. Who was Amina? Why did she faint during his song? What connection did she sense? Yet he had no answers, and that unsettled him as much as it intrigued him. Meanwhile, in her hospital bed across town, Amina regained consciousness. The steady beep of monitors welcomed her back to awareness. Vividly recalling the boy's voice, she knew she had to find him again. Something about it had dragged her into the past she'd tried to bury. As soon as she felt able, she resolved to return to the Kwame Lounge and speak to the owner, hoping for answers. The following night, still weak but determined, Amina walked through the lounge's doors. Spotting Juma behind the bar, she approached with resolute steps. "That boy who sang last night, Kwame," she began, her voice a bit shaky. "I need to know who he is." Juma, ever protective of Kwame, hesitated. He'd promised secrecy. "Why?" he asked. "Why do you need to know?" Amina took a deep breath, trying to put her reasoning into words. "He reminded me of someone I loved. I suspect he might be related to him. Please, I have to speak to him." Juma saw the urgency in her eyes and something genuine in her plea. After a long moment, he nodded. "All right, I'll talk to Kwame. If he agrees, you can meet him tomorrow." The next evening, Juma pulled Kwame aside. "There's someone here asking about you. She says it's about your past. It's up to you if you want to meet her." Kwame's heart raced, suspecting it was the woman who'd collapsed. Curious and anxious, he agreed. Juma led him to a small corner of the lounge where Amina sat. Up close, Kwame could see a swirl of emotions in her gaze. "Hello, Kwame," she said softly. "Hi," he replied, cautious. Amina struggled with where to start. Finally, she said, "You remind me of someone I knew a long time ago. His name was Kofi. He was a singer, like you. I loved him, but he disappeared one day, and I never saw him again. Hearing you sing last night, it was like hearing his voice again." Kwame frowned in confusion. "Kofi? I don't know anyone by that name. My grandmother raised me and never told me much about my parents." Amina's heart sank, though she had been so sure. Then Kwame continued, as though talking to himself. "She said my father was a musician, but she never told me his name." Amina's breath caught. Could he really be Kofi's son? The realization flooded her with tears. "Kwame, I think I knew your father," she said. Kwame froze, mind racing. How could this stranger know anything about his father? A man he had never even met. Abena had always been vague. He had countless questions, but one thing felt certain. If Amina was telling the truth, everything he knew was about to change. Amina's eyes shone with regret. "I know this must be overwhelming," she murmured, "but please, your voice. It's so like Kofi's. Your expressions, your eyes. It's like seeing a ghost from my past. I loved him, Kwame. We were going to start a family together. Then he vanished." Kwame's heart raced. Could this woman be telling the truth? Why had Abena kept his father's identity a secret all these years? "I don't know what to say," he whispered. "My grandmother told me he left when I was a baby. She said he was a musician, but that's it." Amina leaned forward. "Maybe Abena knows more than she told you. There could be a reason for her secrecy." The thought of Abena in the hospital made Kwame's chest tighten. She was too ill, but maybe she was also the only one who could confirm the truth. "I don't know," Kwame admitted. "She's very sick. I don't want to upset her, but I have to know." Amina placed a gentle hand on his arm. "I understand. I don't want to cause you more pain, but if there's a chance I knew your father, we owe it to ourselves to find out." Kwame looked into her eyes and saw desperation for closure mirrored in his own longing for answers. Part of him wanted to believe her, but he was afraid. Still, he finally nodded. "Okay, I'll talk to Abena. Maybe she'll tell me what really happened." That night, Kwame lay awake in his orphanage bed, the weight of the day's revelations pressing down on him. He thought about everything Abena had done for him, how loving she had been. Why keep his father a secret? What if there was a reason for Kofi's disappearance? The next morning, Kwame rushed to the hospital, heart pounding with both dread and hope. Amina had offered to come, but Kwame wanted to face Abena alone. Her room was quiet except for the beeping of machines. She looked pale, but a tired smile lit her face when she saw him. "Hello, my boy," she said faintly. "You look worried." Kwame swallowed, tears threatening. "Abena. I need to ask about my father." Her smile faded, replaced by a sadness he'd never seen. She was silent for a long moment, then softly said, "I knew this day would come. You deserve to know the truth." Kwame held his breath, heart pounding as Abena began to speak. "Your father, Kofi, was a good man. He loved you more than anything, but there were things in his life he couldn't control, enemies who wanted to hurt him. He thought the only way to protect you was to disappear. One night, he left without telling me where he was going, only that he had to keep you safe. I didn't know if I'd see him again. I didn't want you to grow up with that pain, so I never told you his name. I thought it was better that way. Kwame's mind reeled. His father had left to protect him. He whispered, "Then why didn't you ever tell me this before?" Abina's eyes filled with tears. "Because I didn't want you hating him for abandoning you. I thought it was best, if you didn't know." Kwame felt overwhelmed. He'd spent years wondering, but instead of relief, he felt more questions. "Did he ever try to come back?" Abina shook her head. "I never heard from him again. I don't know what happened, but I always believed he did what he thought was best for you." Tears blurred Kwame's vision as he realized how big this secret truly was. He'd always imagined meeting his father, but the reality felt more complicated. Abina gently squeezed his hand. "I'm sorry, my boy. I wish things were different. But whatever happens, know how proud I am of you. You've become such a strong, kind young man. Your father would be proud too." Kwame wiped away tears. I just wish I could have known him." Abina's frail hand pressed his gently. "You're not alone. You have me and now Amina." Outside, Amina waited, heart pounding. When Kwame emerged, eyes red, she stood at once. "How did it go?" He took a deep breath. "She told me everything. My father's name was Kofi. He left to protect me, but I don't know if he's alive. I don't even know where he is." Amina's heart clenched. "So it's true," she murmured. "You're Kofi's son." She felt relief to finally have proof, and sorrow for Kwame's turmoil. "I'm sorry," she said, voice thick with emotion. "I wish I could have helped you sooner." Kwame shrugged, looking torn. "I just don't know how to feel." Amina placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "You don't have to go through this alone. We'll figure it out together." In the days that followed, Kwame struggled to process everything. He still sang at the K-Lounge, pouring his emotions into every performance, but thoughts of his father weighed on him. Meanwhile, Abina's condition worsened. Though the money Kwame earned helped, time was running out. Desperate, he threw himself even more into singing, hoping it would be enough to save her. Life took on a new rhythm: music, responsibility, and uncertainty. His performances grew in popularity, word spreading across Nairobi about this young singer who seemed able to stop time with his voice. Despite the increasing recognition, Kwame stayed focused on one goal: raising enough to save Abina. Amina became more involved in his life, providing emotional support he badly needed. It wasn't just about Kofi anymore. Amina had come to care for Kwame deeply, as though he were the son she'd never had. She respected his drive and understood the pain he hid, wounds from a father who vanished and a grandmother whose life hung in the balance. One evening, after a performance, Kwame sat down with Amina. They'd grown close in the short time since they met, and Kwame trusted her. Taking a breath, he said, "Amina, I've been thinking about my father constantly. I don't even know if he's still alive, but I need answers. I have to know why he left, why he never came back." Amina nodded, aware of his struggle. "I've been thinking about that too. I'll help you find out what happened. Are you sure you're ready for anything we might discover?" Kwame hesitated. "It's like a huge part of my life is missing. I have to fill it in." "Then we'll start looking," Amina said. "I have connections, people who might help us track him down. Whatever the truth is, we'll face it together." The next morning, she began making calls, reaching out to old friends, private investigators, and anyone who might know Kofi's whereabouts. Days turned to weeks. The search was slow and frustrating, but eventually Amina got a promising lead. From a private investigator, Henry Mwangi. He told her, "I think I've found someone matching Kofi's description, living in a small town outside Nairobi. Kept a low profile for years, but the details line up." Amina's heart skipped a beat. "Are you sure?" she asked, voice shaking with excitement and fear. Henry replied, "As sure as I can be. I'll give you the address, but approach carefully if it's him. He may not want to be found." After thanking Henry, Amina called Kwame. "I think we found your father," she said, trembling. "He's not far. If you want, I'll take you." Kwame felt his stomach twist. He'd spent a lifetime imagining this scenario, uncertain how it might feel when the moment arrived. Part of him was desperate for answers, another part worried it might hurt him more. But he knew he had to go. "I'm ready," he said quietly. The drive was tense and silent. Kwame sat staring out the window as Amina stole concerned glances at him. At last, they pulled up to a modest house on the outskirts of a small town. Paint peeling, grass overgrown. Unremarkable, yet Kwame's heart pounded. "This is it," Amina said softly. "Are you ready?" Kwame wasn't sure, but he nodded. Together they walked up and knocked. After a moment, the door opened, revealing a man older and careworn, his face etched with years of hardship. Yet, there was no mistaking him. This was Kofi, Kwame's father. For a long moment, neither spoke. Kofi stared at Kwame, expression unreadable, while Kwame tried to process the reality of standing before the father he'd never known. Amina, a few steps behind, felt her heart ache, seeing her lost love again after so many years. Finally, Kofi broke the silence. You look just like your mother," he said, his voice rough. Kwame swallowed, emotions swirling in his chest. "Why did you leave?" he asked, voice trembling. "Why didn't you come back for me?" Kofi's face contorted with regret. He looked down, unable to meet Kwame's eyes. "I thought I was doing what was best for you," he said quietly. "I made mistakes, and by the time I realized it, it was too late. I was scared. I didn't know how to come back or if you'd even want me." Kwame's hands balled into fists at his sides. "You should have tried," he cried. "You should have been there for me, for Abena. She's dying, and I don't know if she'll make it." Kofi's eyes filled with tears. He stepped forward, reaching out as if to comfort his son, but Kwame pulled away. "I'm sorry," Kofi whispered, his voice broken. "I was a coward. I thought leaving would keep you safe, but I was wrong. I know I can't make up for the time I lost, but if you'll let me, I want to be part of your life now." Kwame stood there, torn between years of anger and a longing for a father he never knew. The conflict raged. Amina gently stepped forward and spoke to Kwame. "This is your choice. Whatever you decide, I'll stand by you." After a long hesitation, Kwame said, barely above a whisper, "Okay, but it's going to take time." Kofi nodded, sorrow and hope mingling in his eyes. "I understand. I'll wait as long as it takes." In the weeks that followed, Kwame and Kofi began a fragile process of rebuilding. It wasn't easy. There were moments of anger and moments of hope. Kofi began attending Kwame's performances at the K Lounge, sitting in the back, quietly watching the son he'd abandoned captivate audiences with his voice. Meanwhile, Abena's condition worsened. Her surgery was scheduled, but the doctors warned that her time was running out. Kwame, more determined than ever, poured his heart into every note, hoping it would be enough to save her. Amina, for her part, became an anchor. Her presence was constant, and she provided the support Kwame needed in ways he couldn't have imagined. She understood abandonment and heartbreak, and she wanted to ensure Kwame never felt that same isolation. Though her past with Kofi remained unresolved, she focused on the present, making sure Kwame felt loved and protected. The night before Abena's surgery, Kwame sat by her bedside, holding her hand. "I found him, Abena," he whispered. "I found my father." Abena smiled weakly, eyes shining with pride despite her frailty. "I knew you would," she said. "You've always been strong." Kwame blinked back tears. "I just want you to get better. I need you." Abena squeezed his hand. "I'll do my best," she whispered. "But no matter what happens, remember, you have people who love you. You're not alone." The next day, the surgery was a success, though Abena's recovery was slow. She remained weak, but there was hope she'd pull through. Kwame felt relief unlike any he'd known. He'd found a sense of peace. He knew the truth about his father, and he had saved the woman who raised him. Standing on the stage at the lounge that evening, singing to a full room, Kwame felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time: genuine hope. In the audience sat Amina, Kofi, and Abena, all together in one place, trying to heal. Weeks after Abena's surgery were marked by a delicate balance of hope and worry. Kwame visited her every day after school and after his performances, watching her regain strength little by little. Whenever he walked into her hospital room, he felt a knot of fear. What if she didn't recover? Yet each small improvement loosened that knot. Abena sensed changes in Kwame too. He seemed lighter, as if the burden of his father's mystery had lifted. The boy who had carried so much responsibility was standing taller now, his heart less weighed down by resentment and questions. She watched him with a smile. "You found peace, haven't you?" she asked one afternoon, her voice soft. Kwame, seated at her bedside, nodded slowly. "I think so. I found Dad. We're talking, trying to fix things." Abena's eyes filled with sadness and relief. "I always hoped you'd find him," she said. "He made a lot of mistakes, but he loved you more than anything." Kwame lowered his gaze, remembering the confrontation. "It's hard to forgive him," he admitted, "for leaving, for staying gone so long. But I'm trying." Abena reached out and took his hand. "That's all you can do. Healing takes time, but you have such a big heart. I know you'll find a way." The bond between grandson and grandmother had always been strong, but now it felt deeper. At the same time, Kwame was beginning to forge a relationship with the father he barely knew. Kofi, for his part, seemed genuinely remorseful and determined, not to run again. Their moments together were sometimes awkward, sometimes promising. Kwame learned to see Kofi not only as the man who abandoned him, but as someone flawed, who truly believed he'd had no choice. Amina, too, remained integral. Initially, she'd been driven by the memory of Kofi, but now she was there for Kwame himself. She had always been reserved, pouring her focus into her career, yet with Kwame she felt a protective instinct she couldn't deny. She admired his determination, recognized his pain, and wanted to help him heal. One evening, just before a performance, Amina found Kwame backstage adjusting his tie. She watched him for a moment, reflecting on how much he'd grown. "You've changed," she said softly. "When I first met you, you were so scared and alone. Now you stand taller." Kwame managed, a small smile in the mirror. "I don't always feel strong," he admitted. "Sometimes I'm still afraid for Abena, for what it means to forgive Dad." Amina laid a hand on his shoulder. "Being scared doesn't mean you're not strong. It just means you care. You've gone through so much, but you haven't let it break you." Kwame turned, meeting her eyes. "Do you really think things will be okay between me and Dad?" he asked. Amina's smile was warm. "I think they're already getting better. You're both trying, and that matters." At that moment, the backstage door opened, and Kofi stepped in, hands in his pockets. He glanced at Amina, then focused on Kwame. "Can we talk for a minute?" Amina stepped aside, giving them space. Kwame felt his stomach tighten. He nodded. Kofi took a breath. "I know I've been trying to rebuild things. I realize it'll take time and I don't want to push you. But I need you to know I'm proud of you. Watching you sing and seeing who you're becoming, it makes me realize what I missed and how much I want to be here now." Kwame's throat felt tight. He'd waited so long for a father's approval, but hearing it stung too, reminding him of all the years of absence. "I want to let you in," Kwame said, voice trembling. "But it's hard. You left, and I spent my whole life wishing you'd come back." Kofi nodded, remorse in his eyes. "I know, I don't expect you to just forget everything, but I'm here now and I won't leave again." They stood in silence, father and son, acknowledging the pain of the past and the hope of the future. Finally, Kwame whispered, "Okay, let's try." In the months that followed, Kwame and Kofi began a fragile process of rebuilding. It wasn't easy. There were moments of anger and moments of hope. Kofi began attending Kwame's performances. At the K-Lounge, sitting in the back, quietly watching the son he'd abandoned captivate audiences with his voice. Meanwhile, Abena's condition worsened. Her surgery was scheduled, but the doctors warned that her time was running out. Kwame, more determined than ever, poured his heart into every note, hoping it would be enough to save her. Amina, for her part, became an anchor. Her presence was constant and she provided the support Kwame needed in ways he couldn't have imagined. She understood abandonment and heartbreak, and she wanted to ensure Kwame never felt that same isolation. Though her past with Kofi remained unresolved, she focused on the present, making sure Kwame felt loved and protected. The night before Abena's surgery, Kwame sat by her bedside, holding her hand. "I found him, Abena," he whispered. "I found my father." Abena smiled weakly, eyes shining with pride despite her frailty. "I knew you would," she said. "You've always been strong." Kwame blinked back tears. "I just want you to get better. I need you." Abena squeezed his hand. "I'll do my best," she whispered. "But no matter what happens, remember, you have people who love you. You're not alone." The next day, the surgery was a success, though Abena's recovery was slow. She remained weak, but there was hope she'd pull through. Kwame felt relief unlike any he'd known. He'd found a sense of peace. He knew the truth about his father, and he had saved the woman who raised him. Standing on the stage at the K-Lounge that evening, singing to a full room, Kwame felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time: genuine hope. In the audience sat Amina, Kofi, and Abena, all together in one place, trying to heal. Weeks after, Abena's surgery were marked by a delicate balance of hope and worry. Kwame visited her every day after school and after his performances, watching her regain strength little by little. Whenever he walked into her hospital room, he felt a knot of fear. What if she didn't recover? Yet each small improvement loosened that knot. Abena sensed changes in Kwame too. He seemed lighter, as if the burden of his father's mystery had lifted. The boy who had carried so much responsibility was standing taller now, his heart less. Weighed down by resentment and questions, she watched him with a smile. "You found peace, haven't you?" she asked one afternoon, her voice soft. Kwame, seated at her bedside, nodded slowly. "I think so. I found Dad. We're talking, trying to fix things." Abena's eyes filled with sadness and relief. "I always hoped you'd find him," she said. "He made a lot of mistakes, but he loved you more than anything." Kwame lowered his gaze, remembering the confrontation. "It's hard to forgive him," he admitted. "For leaving, for staying gone so long, but I'm trying." Abena reached out and took his hand. "That's all you can do. Healing takes time, but you have such a big heart. I know you'll find a way." The bond between grandson and grandmother had always been strong, but now it felt deeper. At the same time, Kwame was beginning to forge a relationship with the father he barely knew. Kofi, for his part, seemed genuinely remorseful and determined not to run again. Their moments together were sometimes awkward, sometimes promising. Kwame learned to see Kofi not only as the man who abandoned him, but as someone flawed who truly believed he'd had no choice. Amina, too, remained integral. Initially, she'd been driven by the memory of Kofi, but now she was there for Kwame himself. She had always been reserved, pouring her focus into her career, yet with Kwame she felt a protective instinct she couldn't deny. She admired his determination, recognized his pain, and wanted to help him heal. No matter how lost we feel, the truth has a way of finding us. Love, perseverance, and faith can heal even the deepest wounds. Family is not just about blood, but about those who stand by us in our darkest moments. Forgiveness takes courage, and second chances are a gift we must embrace with an open heart. Ya Allah, guide us through the trials of life, grant us the strength to face our past, and the wisdom to embrace our future. Fill our hearts with love, patience, and forgiveness. Keep our loved ones safe, heal the sick, and bless us with the courage to follow the path of righteousness. Ameen.